This time on Poll Hub, are we headed for another government shutdown? It's a real possibility, with Democrats and Republicans in Congress arguing who is going to raise the debt limit. What do Americans think? Do we even care that much? Then, how does a 4-day work week sound? I mean, I like the sound of that. A lot of Americans like the idea, and post-pandemic, it may become a reality for more of us. We're going to talk with workplace expert Alex Pang about that. And then finally, when you meet somebody, first time, face or name? Which way do you remember them? Or are you like me? Can't remember either. We're going to talk about that too. That's Lee's fun fact. Lots to do, so let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho.
And I'm Lee Marigoff.
Well, we thought we'd start off today with something we actually haven't heard about in a while. And that's the U.S. debt ceiling. And we haven't heard about it in a while because Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, suspended it during the Trump administration for 2 years in August of 2019. So those of you who can really do the math, in August 1st of this year, we're now approaching the X date, as it's likely to be referred to, when the U.S. is about to run out of money to pay its obligations. And also the point at which the Treasury Department is no longer going to be allowed to borrow money to cover government operations. So we wanted to take a look at what Americans actually think about this. So do Americans care about the debt ceiling, guys?
Well, spoiler alert, it has something to do with politics. How's that?
What?
I would say that there is a sense of concern when we get toward the brink of disaster, but in the off season, there's not much concern. So this is sort of like it flares up and then goes away. And I think right now what we're getting into is, there are regular game of chicken, which occurs in Washington when both sides posture for fiscal sanity while they're planning perhaps other moves. So I think that the country sort of takes a backseat until there's a shutdown. And I think that's where the thing really changes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is nobody pays attention to the debt or the debt limit until there's a reason to. And the reason to is when the government shuts down, or the threat of default, which could have huge impacts on the markets and all of our 401ks and all kinds of other stuff. I mean, it could, that doomsday scenario is a real doomsday scenario when you talk to financial experts. But it's interesting, we have experience in this, right? We've run into these situations where there's been arguments and fights, not always related to the debt limit, but that have led to the government shutdown. And I think government shutdown is the most salient kind of outcome, from a debt limit fight. In 2019, the longest government shutdown in history during the Trump administration happened. And at that time, Pew did a survey, this was in early 2019, 58% of Americans thought that it was a very serious problem for the country in the midst of the government shutdown, right? This is a very serious problem. In 2013, a lot of Americans thought it was a very serious problem when we had a shutdown during the Obama administration. What's interesting, though, is there's a partisan gap. If your guy's in charge, you're less likely to think it's serious than if the other guy's in charge. And that shouldn't surprise anybody, right?
Yeah, and I guess to go back to your point, it's not a concern. And people say, look, I don't like government anyway. What do I need government? Until you hear things like Social Security payments, veteran payments, defaulting, uncertainty in the stock market, pensions, and then all of a sudden you say, gee, this could really affect me. And that's where it turns sour.
Well, the debt ceiling isn't exactly a new phenomenon. I mean, it's over 100 years old. And if I recall my history and poli-sci courses, I think it was actually instituted to be a good thing. In other words, to allow Congress to spend up to a certain amount. So it didn't have to keep going back and forth every time, it needed more money for catastrophes or, sudden expenditures like, wars. But it being a political football is not a new thing either. But I think most of us kind of, remember the more recent times when Congress has made it a political battle, and both sides have done that. What I find fascinating is that when we look at the political debate over whether or not the debt ceiling should be raised so the government can continue spending money, both, whichever side is against raising it always points to the spending of the administration. The administration kind of in power that's proposing things. But isn't the debt limit really just about meeting the obligations Congress has already passed and has already agreed to pay?
Yeah, but it's all mixed up now in the discussion of the infrastructure money.
Right.
So that's like, is that new money? And if that's new money, what's that going to do to the debt limit? So the whole thing gets very complicated very quickly in the atmosphere, in the toxic atmosphere, I should say, Washington.
I would love if we asked the question, do you really think that Republicans or Democrats, fill in the blank, are being serious in their arguments about why the debt ceiling is on the other guy? Because, I mean, it just strikes me that it's so clear that each time that this happens, we get to a shutdown especially, that the talking points, they just, here, have my talking points from last time,
right?
And you change the pages. And it does come then down to the politics. This is about politics at the end of the day. Who blinks because of who's going to get blamed? Back in 2013, this was tied up in funding for Obamacare, which was, a political neutron bomb. A lot of people thought, especially on the Republican side, one that helped them. But we saw when we looked at, we went back in time and looked at polls from 2013, one by Princeton Survey Research Associates done for the National Journal and United Technologies. But they looked at the partisan breakdown of who do you blame. Republicans, 8% of Republicans blamed Republicans. 73% of Democrats blamed Republicans. You flip it, and or Republicans, you flip it, and then the Democrats get blamed for it by Republicans. But at the end of the day, Americans in general tended to blame Republicans more than Democrats, and so I think that's the calculation that gets made in Washington right now. Who's going to blink? Either Mitch McConnell or Chuck Schumer is going to blink, depending on which one thinks is going to take more of the blame and more of a hit, because we've got elections next year, 2022.
And I think when it comes to public opinion, debt doesn't make the top of the list. It does for a small group of Americans, fiscal conservatives, who do see that this can become a serious problem. But I think overall, Americans' attention focuses in on this issue when it actually starts honing in on our daily lives, which is the two words we don't want to hear: government shutdown.
Yep.
So hopefully the two sides come together before that date, which is approaching, comes upon us.
And so we want to turn gears and talk a little bit about a four-letter word, one that we can use on radio and podcast: work. And work being something that has really changed a lot during this pandemic. Where we work, how we work, when we work, who we work with, how we work with other people. And we ran across something really interesting as we look at various things to talk about on the podcast. There is a lot of talk about a 4-day work week, which we all might have great feelings about. But there's talk about this 4-day work week that's much more serious, I think, than maybe it has been in the past. Iceland has run a trial of this. Scotland is in the process of doing so. But it's not a new idea, and we wanted to welcome onto the podcast Alex Pang, who is a 4-time author focusing on work. He's also a speaker and consultant. He's the founder of Strategy and Rest. This is a consultancy devoted to helping companies and workers harness the power of rest. This is shortening workdays, but still staying productive. Alex, long intro, sorry. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks very much for having me.
So am I right in saying that this talk about a 4-day work week has at least something to do with the fact that we've all kind of reconsidered what work means during this pandemic?
Absolutely. I think that for individuals, a lot of us have thanks to the pandemic, working from home, et cetera, and also the fact that we've all been dealing with, in the United States, 600,000 plus people, sort of dying during it, have reconsidered both how we work and kind of the place of work in our lives. And then for companies, I think they've discovered that, organizations and individuals have a capacity to change how we work much more dramatically than we ever thought possible in January of 2020. And so all of this together has sort of created this kind of perfect storm, I hope a good one ultimately, that opens a space for reconsidering how we work and experimenting with new ways of doing so, one of which is the 4-day week.
When was the last time we actually revised how Americans work? I mean, looking back, the 40-hour week, now perhaps the 37.5-hour week, which has expanded to a 60-hour salaried week for many people. So just historically, when have we actually, as a country, looked at how we go about work?
You could say that the last sort of legal redefinition of the work week and of what counts as regular hours versus overtime, that dates back to the Roosevelt administration in the 1930s. Of course, as you indicate, there have been cultural changes that have pushed working hours up for, for lots of particularly salaried workers and professionals. We've also had the emergence of a gig economy and the growing a growing sector of highly contingent, precarious work, often without benefits that was not legislated by anybody, but certainly has been exploited by lots of companies. So I think that the last time that we were seriously thinking about a 4-day week was probably in the late 60s and early 70s, when just before the oil crisis. Though it is an idea that's been around for a while. Actually, Richard Nixon gave a speech about it in 1956, where he talked about,
oh my goodness,
where he talked about how the Eisenhower administration, working with industry, could deliver technological innovations that would allow manufacturers and professionals to spend more time with their families, thus exemplifying the kind of people's capitalism that the Republican alliance of business and pro-friendly government could deliver for all Americans.
Oh, how the Republican Party has changed, right?
But sticking to work rather than politics. So what exactly happened? Because that is something that we all think of, that technology was somehow going to increase leisure time, family time, and give us all that relaxation and rest that from your research is so important.
Mm-hmm. So I think that the top line is a couple things happened. One of them is that we shifted from a model of what constitutes, what kind of successful careers look like, thanks to particularly the tech and finance industries in the 1980s, where success no longer looked like you started at the bottom of a company, paid your dues, spent your time, and worked your way up to the top, right? In the 50s, General Motors and General Electric were at one point both run by guys named Charlie Wilson, who had started out, in the mailroom. And now, success consisted of working titanically long hours so that you could get your company to go public before you burned out, and or the next round of technological innovation rendered you irrelevant. I think also that the fact that we have the ability to carry our offices around in our pockets has created a world in which, flexibility, what started out as flexibility and mobility has turned into a kind of imperative and desire to stay always on and always connected. And finally, we have, business models that have done a remarkable job of either, satisfying people's greed, appealing to people's ambition, or weaponizing their idealism to get them to work ever longer hours. So, all of this together has meant that not only have working hours gotten, longer, but life itself has gotten more complicated, and juggling all of that has become difficult. For everybody.
Let's talk again about the 4-day work week, and I want to inject a little poll numbers. We are a poll after all, and Morning Consult did a poll back in June and asked about whether people preferred a certain number of different options. There's a 3-day, 4-day, 5-day, 6-day, and 7-day work week. Shockingly, 12% of urban people said they wanted a 7-day work week. I don't even want to start on that. But the 4-day work week was the plurality most popular. 40% of employed adults said they preferred that to 35% of 5 hours a day, and much smaller numbers for the others. I noticed a big gender gap here, though. 49% of women preferred a 4-day work week at 10 hours a day, and only 34% of men preferred that. Actually, more men preferred a 5-day week. What does this say about two things? One, what does it say that a 4-day work week is among employed adults, the plurality favorite? And what is it about this gender gap that we should be looking at?
My guess would be that a 4-day week seems like a positive change, but also a doable one compared, if you're going from a 5-day week. It's also, of course, been in the news and gotten some positive press coverage, which I think also helps. But I think there's also a sense that, just having one more day a week every week could make a really tangible difference in everybody's lives. And the evidence that I've seen looking at a couple hundred companies now all over the world is that that's absolutely the case. As for the gender breakdown, I think this reflects the fact that there are stubborn differences and inequalities in the ways in which women and men have to sort of navigate the workforce, build their careers, balance work and life, that even relatively progressive countries and companies with well-meaning policies have failed to really sort of unpack or to solve. And I think that the fact that when working parents move to a 4-day week, what tends to happen is that men spend more time on housework, spend more time with family. Working mothers, on the other hand, spend more time on themselves. I think is a nice illustration of how how there is how women right now are having to go home and do the second shift, and how when you get more free time, there is a sense that that within families you can rebalance working hours this way. So and then there are some other benefits, particularly to to working moms, that the 4-day week provides, that I think make it that allow life to become more sustainable, and also careers to become more viable. That's why I think that the 4-day week emerges both as a plurality, but with some gender differences.
Now, what jumped out to me in some of these poll numbers, and we looked at the Morning Consult, and also Gallup has done a good amount of public opinion work on different times, work week schedules, and also how productive and engaged workers get. But what really struck me was the generational differences that older Americans, particularly Gen X, and in fact the majority of baby boomers, long for a 4-day work week. When we look at Gen Z or millennials, it's more of a mixed bag. In fact, with millennials, the plurality, actually, we're more comfortable, with the 5-day work week. Is this just kind of, a lifestyle? Is this, or life stage, I might say, where, people who are older, pushing 40 now, our millennials are now 40, and Gen X is older. Are we actually looking at something that's a lifestyle, a life stage, or a generational shift?
Right. I think it's lifestyle and life stage. What I see in companies that make the transition is that the most enthusiastic people in the company tend to be somewhat older. I mean, older in their careers, right? And of course, parents also really like it. those two things, of course, tend to track. And these are sort of the people who know their jobs really well, who've been around the industry long enough to know what's wrong and to feel like if they had the chance they could fix it, are the ones who are most enthusiastic about diving into a 4-day week because it will, because they sense it will give them an opportunity to have, more autonomy at work, to do the kind of work that they really want, to exercise these skills that they haven't been able to use before, and to make their careers kind of more sustainable. While also getting the benefits of of having more time to be better parents. So I think, given the field work that I've done, that's my sense of sort of what this means. There is, among younger workers, often some concern that this will, slow down their careers or sort of reduce their opportunities for professional development. And the way that, let's say, software companies deal with this is to take that fifth day and offer people some opportunities for professional development, right? Learning new programming languages, or getting, playing around with Internet of Things, or, doing that kind of tinkering that people often really like to do in order to keep their skills fresh and, or move to the next level in their professions. And that's something that, everybody likes, and which at different stages in your professional life, everybody can make good use of to one degree or another. So I think that, in the absence of opportunities like this, the kind of response that you see makes total sense. But I think that there are ways of of designing 4-day weeks and opportunities that, will really work well across all generations.
Before we go, and we don't, I'm so interested in what you kind of think of the future of this is. This strikes me in the U.S. as an unlikely government mandated kind of thing. It's hard for us to agree on anything. And so it seems like it's driven by companies, but we think of this as something, I think right now, is it's the luxury of the tech companies or the companies that are not public yet, so they still are running on VC money, they can afford to do these kinds of things. Do you think there's a bigger place in the economy for this, that companies, American companies or maybe European companies, will roll out in larger measure over the next few years?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked the question about about what kinds of companies can do this, because I have examples that are not just, software startups or, creative firms, but they're also, law firms, right? Places that bill by the minute, as well as places like nursing homes and even pest control companies. And so it turns out, it's not just salaried professional white collar workers who can access and who can benefit from this. It's also blue collar workers as well, and they get just as much benefit as everybody else. As for, the government mandate, so far what we have seen is that this has been very much a bottom up movement rather than a top down one in the United States. Other countries, it's worked a little differently. Iceland has actually moved from a trial to implementing a shorter work week for its entire public sector, which is about 15% of its adult workforce. So, the early results there are very promising. And I think that what we're seeing is a slow move from small, nimble companies that have a charismatic founder who can declare, we're going to try this and, make it happen, to experiments on the part of larger firms where, either they're trying it in the Australia office, or they're trying it first in the finance division or in some particular product line. And so I'm seeing this in Unilever, Medtronic, sort of other big companies trying these kinds of experiments. And then finally, I think we're starting to see also some interest at the local level, right? I've been contacted by a couple, mayors who have the idea that, they're small towns, they're trying to kind of rebuild, and they're thinking, sort of coordinating with the Chamber of Commerce, with the school district, making yourself into a place that is kind of tuned for the 4-day week could be a way to revitalize the town, to bring back businesses, to get to get those people who left, who built businesses someplace else, who are looking now for a better quality of life, to get them back and to support them and to make that possible. So I think, we're probably going to see some of that kind of thing in the next couple of years. Whether we will see it, a sort of a reform of working hours, like, along the lines of what Representative Mark Takano has recently proposed. Sort of your guess is as good as is probably better than mine. I know a lot more about companies than I do about the inner workings of Congress.
How many days a week do you work?
I tend to work more like 4-hour days, 5 or 6 days a week. Partly I've got, when I'm writing, it's good to work intensively, but kind of continuously. And I also have clients in Europe and Asia, so I've got to do a little time shifting.
Alex, thanks for joining us. We'll put all of Alex's information in the show notes. So if you want to follow him and catch up on the work that he's doing, you can do that there. Great discussion. Barb, do you think we could shift to a 4-day work week here at Marist College? Do you think that's in the cards?
Well, I think we've reached a tipping point with the pandemic where everything is going to be evaluated. But colleges tend to be more 24/7.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks. It's a pleasure.
Well, it's my turn and fun fact time. And the question is, after you've met a person for the first time, are you more likely to remember that person's face? Or are you more likely to remember his or her name? And unless you're a local politician, this is a totally different kind of issue. Although I must say, if we only go to 1 day a week work week, then I got problems here because I'm not seeing anybody.
I don't think anybody said anything about a 1 day a week work week, although I'm willing to try that one too.
But when I'm teaching class on remote, I've got the names under it, so it actually gives me a much better chance to identify names and faces. Having said that, the national numbers on this, 87% say they're more likely to remember the face, 8% the name. And I would say I'm definitely in that category, only because I have tough time remembering names. The Dapper, I'm not sure. Anyway.
You have trouble with names and faces, and I don't think that was one of the choices. So we may want to re-ask this question.
Well, I would say first comes name. That's the hardest for me. And then, do I know you? You look familiar. Probably becomes secondary. So I got a better shot at the face. What about you guys?
This is one of those questions. This was asked in 1991, Princeton Survey Research Associates, another Princeton poll. And we got this from the Roper Archives, where we find a lot of these great old polls. This is one that it kind of doesn't matter when it's asked. I bet this wouldn't be any different if you asked it in 1931 versus 1991 versus right now in 2021. Because I don't think this changes much. I don't know. I'm definitely a face person. I remember faces, and it's the same as with you, Lee. It's like, you look familiar. Oh, hi. Oh, hi.
Well, they should have also included if the person is walking or you see them with a pet, because I will generally remember the pet's name and the pet. So, the other weekend, you guys know I love to take the horses out on the trail. And we met this lovely couple from Ridgefield, Connecticut, walking their dog Zeke. And then the next day we saw them again. And I said hello to Zeke. And they said hello to my horse Blossie. So we remembered the animals, we remembered the names, and sort of the faces, but maybe not.
Not to get picky here, but is the face familiar, or can we actually identify the face? Like, I know you are such and such, I just can't remember your name. I don't want to get picky here, but
yeah, this is a very complicated poll now. Casey, what about you? Face or name?
I'm weird in that I remember your face, I remember your name, but God forbid you ask me to connect the two and figure out who is who.
Okay, that's different. Ashley?
I am much better at remembering people's faces. I need to get better at names because I do a lot of stuff on campus for Marist, and especially in the theater, which requires knowing a lot of people's names, and I'm not good at it.
And you sound the way you do. This is interesting. You sound the way you do right now because you have a mask on. How does that affect all of us in recognizing faces when we have masks on?
It is so much harder. So many people don't recognize me. I've had to tell them also in general what masks I wear on the daily. So they'll recognize me. I'm not joking. And they got mad at me when I didn't wear one of the masks. They're like, I couldn't recognize you because you weren't wearing the flower mask. And I was like, I'm sorry.
Wow. There's a whole new poll here, a whole new set of questions.
But that is difficult.
Yeah. And Marcello?
I'm pretty good. I could remember your name and your face. I'm good with connecting the two.
Okay, you're off. Get rid of him.
Yeah.
Yeah, forget it.
I like Casey's answer. I walk into the office and she'll say, "Hi, Lee, and you do what here?"
Well, that's fair. Hey, so I have one other question, which mainly is for people who are in couples or married. Do you have a trick when you're with your partner and you meet somebody and you can't remember their name to get them to say their name?
Well, I think you sort of, well, that can be clumsy, but you can sort of.
The problem with Lee is he doesn't always realize if he's forgotten your face and your name.
Okay, all right.
He's forgotten.
Okay.
He's just forgotten. So he's just going to introduce himself again.
So we have a trick, though, where if it's somebody, we turn and we go, "This is," and you introduce your partner. And the partner sticks out their hand, and then that person says the name. Bingo. Done.
I'll tell a quick story. We were working with a client, and we went into the hallway. Meeting was over, and then I saw somebody I knew, and then I said, "Well, I'd like to introduce you and to this other person." And I said, "And you are?" And the person said, "Lee, I just spent 3 hours with you, sitting next to you at a meeting." And we got the job. So I must say, I don't know
he was very forgiving.
Very forgiving. Yeah. Anyway, so I think this is, definitely something we got to look at. There's a lot here.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor. Poll Hub team includes Ashley Marcinek and Marcello Bettman.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review. Positive reviews help other like-minded listeners find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy. It's our free online learning portal. If you've got questions, tweet them to us at Marist Poll.
Finally, however, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button. Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released. We'll see you next time.